The wagon creaked across the empty scrubland, dragged by two mules whose ribs showed through their skins like old fence posts. Wind slashed across the open earth, lifting dust that bit into flesh like sandpaper. The sky was bleached white, not a cloud in sight, only the sound of distant crows and rattling wheels. Inside the wagon, chained to an iron hook, Clara Dane sat with her back against a splintered board. Her wrists were raw, her face bruised. Her lips had split down the middle and bled in the heat. She stared blankly ahead, but her eyes held something. That hadn't broken yet, not entirely. She didn't ask where they were taking her. She already knew. The men had talked about it over their whiskey the night before, how the camp outside Broken Tooth Canyon needed women again. Not wives, not cooks, not even whores, just women to punish. Women to break. Her stepfather had signed the deal with. A laugh and a bottle of corn liquor. Sighed she talked too much and was bad in the bones. He handed her off like a sack of flour. Clara hadn't spoken since. They reached the camp by dusk. If it could be called a camp, the place was a circle of canvas tents and broken timber, littered with broken bottles and rusted tools, the stench of sweat and unwashed men clinging to the air. A bonfire was already roaring, casting long shadows across the dust. Someone beat a tin pan with the butt of a rifle, yelling, "Got ourselves a new one." They dragged her out like livestock, one man gripping her hair, the other holding the shackle chain like reins. She stumbled but didn't fall. She wouldn't give them that. Jed Hawley stood near the fire with a branding iron already in the coals. He was thick-chested, missing an eye, and always smelled like burnt grease. "This one's mouthy," someone said. Jed grinned. "Ain't no man gonna touch her after tonight. She carry our mark." He reached into the flames with iron tongs, lifting out the red-hot brand shaped like a crooked cross. They shoved Clara to her knees. Someone held her arms behind her. Another pressed her flat against the hard-packed dirt, forcing her shirt up until her stomach was bare. She felt the heat before it touched her, then came the smell, like seared leather and bacon fat. Her body arched, muscles clenched. But she did not scream. She stared at the firelight and whispered, "Mama." The crowd cheered. Someone laughed. Another spit. The brand was pulled away, leaving a raised, blistered mark just below her ribs, already weeping an angry red. That night they threw her into a corner of the supply tent, bleeding and silent. No water, no salve, no comfort, just a blood-soaked cloth wrapped around her middle. She didn't cry. She'd done enough of that in her life. This pain, at least, was hers to hold. But then, near midnight, the tent flap rustled. A small figure ducked inside, an older woman with wiry gray hair, wrinkled hands, and a face full of sorrow. May, a camp washerwoman, unseen but everywhere. She knelt by Clara and pulled out a flask and some torn cloth. "This ain't right," she whispered. "No woman deserves this." Not for speaking her mind, not for saying no. Clara didn't answer. But when the water touched her wound, her eyes filled. May worked in silence, wiping away the blood, applying lard from a greasy tin. "They want you to feel ruined, but you're not." 2 nights later, Clara woke to the sound of distant gunfire, drunken men shooting bottles for fun. May appeared again, silent this time, holding out a water skin and a rag-wrapped knife. "They'll sell you again once the swelling's down?" May said, "Better you run and die free than live under that mark." Clara couldn't walk straight. The wound pulled at her skin like a curse, but she took the knife and the water. She didn't say thank you, didn't trust her voice to hold. Steady. She crept past snoring men, past the half-dead mule tied to a fence post, past the fire that had scarred her, and into the wild Texas dark. By dawn she was limping across hardpan earth, the sun already burning overhead. Buzzards circled in the distance. Her water was gone before noon. Blood from her belly soaked into her shirt with every step. She didn't know where she was going, only that it was away. Her boots split, her legs shook. The desert was vast and cruel, and she was too small inside it, but she kept walking, because every step was a step away from Jed Hawley, from the mark, from the lie that no man would ever want her again. Clara didn't remember falling. One moment, The world was the blistered stretch of dry earth ahead of her, shimmering like water that wasn't there. The next, the ground was rushing up, hard and merciless. Her knees gave first, then her elbows, then her breath. She collapsed beside a dry creek bed, face pressing into dust, lips cracked wide open. Buzzards circled high above, silent sentinels waiting for her stillness to mean something final. She heard voices. Not from the sky, but from somewhere deeper memories, unspooling in her fevered mind, her mother's soft lullaby, her stepfather's drunken curse, laughter around the fire and the searing hiss of a hot iron meeting flesh. She clawed at her stomach. The brand was still there, throbbing under sunburned skin. When she opened her eyes again, the world had changed. She was in shadow. Stone walls loomed around her. She was lying on a pile of dry moss and blankets, something soft cradling her head. A low fire flickered nearby, crackling against the silence. She blinked against the dimness, heart racing. Her side ached, but it was no longer bleeding. Her wound had been cleaned, wrapped in fresh cloth. She wasn't alone. A shape sat at the cave entrance, watching the night beyond. Tall, broad-shouldered, still as a statue, he wore no hat. Braided dark hair fell against his neck, and silver glinted from a pendant at his throat. His bare arms were painted with old scars and newer ones. A long blade rested against his knee, untouched. He didn't look at her. He just listened to the wind. Panic surged. Clara reached for the rag-wrapped knife she'd kept beneath her belt. But before her fingers touched it, his hand was already there. Calm, firm, not hurting, just stopping her. He pushed it gently aside and then reached into a satchel by the fire. A strip of dried meat, a gourd of water. He placed them at her feet and returned to his post, never speaking. Clara's breath came hard. Her heart thumped like a trapped bird. She should have run, should have screamed. But she didn't. Something in the way he moved told her he wasn't a threat. Not like the others. She remembered the warnings her stepfather used to spit when drunk. If the Comanche don't scalp you, they'll steal your soul. Savages, the lot of 'em. But nothing about this man felt savage. If anything, he was restrained, too still, too watchful. Days passed, he never left her alone too long, never touched her. He tended the fire, left food, washed her bandage with careful hands. When she tried to speak, he said nothing. When she tried to thank him, he only nodded once. Clara healed, slowly. The fever broke on the third night. She could sit up without crying. She began to notice the cave, how he kept it clean, neat, with bundles of herbs tucked into the cracks. How he sat every evening near the opening, staring at the stars. How he hummed not loudly, just a soft tune like wind passing through cedar. She asked his name once. He didn't answer. Another day she pointed to herself. Clara. Her voice was thin, rough from disuse. He stared at her for a moment, eyes unreadable. Tohan, he said, voice low like distant thunder, that was all. Tohan showed her how to find drinkable, water-watching lizards, following the insects. He showed her how to walk without leaving prints in soft dirt. How to rub sagebrush on her skin to keep the flies off. Always by gesture, never by speech. She began to mirror him. When he crouched to observe a bird's track, she did the same. When he placed a stone on the path to mark their direction, she remembered it. But at night, she still curled up alone, her hand over the brand that never stopped throbbing. One evening, clouds rolled across the sky, fast and mean. A storm broke, hard rain pouring in thick ropes, thunder shaking the cave walls. Lightning split the sky like a curse. Water rushed. And fast, soaking the moss bed, Clara shot upright, gasping. The fire hissed. Her breath caught in her throat as panic closed in. The noise, the flashes, it all sounded like screaming. Like the night at the camp? She backed against the wall, shaking, trying not to sob. And then he was there. Tohan knelt beside her. He didn't speak, he didn't ask. He just wrapped himself around her like a shield, his body broad, warm, sheltering. She trembled against him, her hands pressed to his chest. His heart beat slow and steady, like a drum in the earth. Her fingers brushed a long scar that ran across his ribs. He didn't flinch, neither did she. For the first time her hand lingered, and her body didn't recoil. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his shoulder. He stayed there, unmoving, until the storm passed. Later, back by the fire, she sat close, still not touching, but near enough to feel his presence like warmth she had forgotten how to want. She looked at him as he hummed again, head tilted toward the stars. He did not glance at her. But something inside her had shifted, something deeper than skin, quieter than pain. In silence, they watched the sky turn black. The morning was cool and dry, windless for once, and Clara moved softly through the underbrush with her knife in hand. Her stomach still ached when she bent down, but the pain had dulled into something she could live with. Tohan had gone ahead, at first light vanishing into the hills with no explanation. He always returned, always, but today the silence felt longer, thicker. She found a patch of wild onions and knelt to dig them out, her hands careful not to bruise the roots. Then she saw it smoke, a thin gray thread rising over the hills. Not the kind of smoke from a cooking fire. This was too much, too wide. Clara stood, heart tight in her chest. She scanned the horizon for movement, but the canyon walls stayed quiet. She waited until the sun slid overhead. Still no Tohan. She should have trusted him, she told herself. But the old fear had a way of creeping in, worming through the bones. Like a chill. What if he'd decided she wasn't worth the trouble anymore? What if the brand meant something even he couldn't overlook? She turned back toward the cave, quickening her steps, branches snagging at her shirt. She was near the dry creek bed when she heard voices male, rough, laughing. She froze. "Hot damn," one said. "Ain't that yet's girl?" "I'd know that." "Walk anywhere." Before she could run, two men stepped out from behind the rocks. Their faces were sunburned and scarred. One had a twisted ear, the other held a rifle that was already aimed. Both grinned like wolves. "Look what the desert spit." "Back," the rifleman said. "Thought you'd be buzzard meat by now." Clara backed away, but the second one grabbed her arm. She twisted, kicked, even bit, but it wasn't enough. They knocked the breath from her lungs with a punch to the ribs and dragged her down the ravine. The camp was smaller than she remembered. Fewer men, more ruins, the fire pit reduced to black stones. But Jed Hawley was still there, sitting on a stump like a king who thought the crown still mattered. "Well, I'll be," Jed muttered, standing as she was thrown before him. "Didn't expect to see this one again?" Still got that fire in her. "Eyes," he stepped forward, kicked dust at her feet. "I ever tell you how good that brand looked when it hissed into your skin?" He reached out, fingers brushing her shirt. "Let's see how it's healing." She slapped his hand away. He grinned wider. "Still proud, huh?" He turned to the others. "Shame no man's ever gonna want her with that mark. Hell, maybe. It's time we gave her a fresh one. Something across the chest this time. Keep the message clear." They laughed. Two men grabbed her arms. Jed stoked the fire, dragging out a half-rusted iron shaped like a hook. He shoved it into the coals until it glowed. "Hold her still," he said. Clara struggled, but her limbs were weak. The pain in her side had reopened. Blood seeped through the cloth. Her legs kicked USELESSLY. Jed leaned in close, breath sour with rotgut whiskey. "Still got our mark. Guess no man wants you still." Then the sound split the air, a sharp whir and a hard thud. The fire pit exploded in a burst of sparks. An arrow buried deep in the woodpile. The camp froze. Another arrow flew, striking a man in the leg, screaming. Chaos, and then Tohan emerged from the shadow's face streaked in war paint, bare-chested, holding a tomahawk and a knife, his eyes locked on hers. No words. Just fury. He moved like smoke-glow, fast, lethal. One man rushed him and got a blade in the gut. Another raised a pistol, only to have it knocked aside with a cracking elbow. Tohan dodged, ducked, spun, blood sprayed, the fire flared. Clara rolled. Free, grabbing a rock and slamming it into the head of the man beside her. Jed scrambled back. Tripping over a crate, Tohan took a hit to the shoulder, a knife thrown from behind. He grunted, stumbled, but didn't fall. Clara saw the branding. Iron, still glowing at the edge of the fire. Jed rose, pulling his revolver. She didn't think. She ran for the iron, gripped it with her bare hand wrapped in cloth, and charged. Jed turned too late. The iron slammed into his face, burning through skin and beard. He screamed, clutching his cheek, dropping the gun. Clara stood over him, breath heaving, eyes burning. Now you carry one too. She threw the iron aside, grabbed Tohan's arm, and pulled him toward the ridge. They ran until the camp disappeared behind them, until the trees swallowed the smoke, until the blood stopped flowing from his wound. Then they collapsed into the dirt. The stars were starting to show. The wind smelled of ash and sweat and pine. Clara leaned over him, checking the bandage she'd tied. Her shirt clung to her back, soaked through. As she sat back, it lifted slightly, exposing the mark. The firelight caught it. That old, ugly scar that had once meant shame, ownership. Tohan reached out slowly. He didn't grab. He didn't leer. He just lifted the edge of her shirt, hands gentle, reverent. His fingers brushed the brand. Then, in a voice cracked and rough, from disuse, he said one word, mine. Clara didn't flinch. Didn't pull away, because this time the word didn't mean possession. It meant recognition. The fire had burned low, leaving only orange embers that pulsed like a second heartbeat in the earth. Clara sat beside Tohan beneath the sweep of stars, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, her fingers checking the cloth at his side. The wound wasn't deep, but it had taken its toll. His body trembled from the fever that came and went like a tide, and she could see him struggling to stay upright. But he stayed silent, as always, eyes locked on the sky like he could read it. She soaked a strip of moss in cold water and laid it over his shoulder again. His skin was warm, too warm. She knew the signs, had watched enough people fade to understand. When a body was fighting something bigger than steel or fire. Still, he didn't complain. He hadn't said a word since that single one, mine. She thought of that word now, turning it over in her chest like a stone softened by years of river. Flow. It didn't echo like the way Jed had said it, drunk and cruel. It didn't brand like the iron that scarred her belly. It rested gently, the way his hand had when he lifted her shirt, not to possess, but to witness. She rose in the dark and walked to the edge of the hill where the desert flattened into open land. She pulled off her shirt, the one she'd worn since that night in the camp. The one stained with blood and dust and things she didn't want to carry anymore. She dug a hole with her hands, dirt cold under her nails, and buried it there under a cedar tree. Let the wind take it. Let the worms eat what was left. When she returned, Tohan was awake, watching her with half-lidded eyes. She sat down beside him. For a long time neither spoke. Then, with effort, he raised one hand, touching the pendant at his neck. It was bone, carved with symbols she didn't understand. He pointed to the stars, then to a small patch of earth beside them. He touched his chest. Wife, he said, voice rough and halting. Gone, whites come, fire, kill all. Clara didn't breathe for a moment. Then she reached for his hand, pressing it between both of hers. His fingers were scarred, rough, calloused like hers. My mama died in a fire too, she whispered. My stepfather sold me like a broken mule. The men who bought me, they wanted to make sure I'd never be wanted again. He didn't move, just listened. I was raised to think love was something taken, something earned through silence. Through suffering, she turned to face him, eyes brimming. But you didn't take, you waited. He looked down, struggling with words. Then slowly, he took her hand and guided it to the scar that stretched across his chest. Her palm rested flat over his heart. He said it again, softer this time. Mine. And this time, she didn't feel claimed. She felt chosen. The next morning came slow and golden, the first light brushing across the hills like a promise. Clara rose, wrapping the shawl Tohan had given her around her shoulders. It was woven in the old Comanche style reds and ochres, the colors of soil and blood and rebirth. She helped Tohan to his feet. He limped but didn't fall. Together they stood at the edge of the ridge, the valley stretching wide and open before them. She didn't walk behind him, she walked beside him. Their hands brushed, just a touch, no grip, no force, just closeness. As they stepped down the ridge, the wind lifted her shawl, catching its edges like wings. Behind them, the past still. Burned in memory, ahead the world waited, not healed, but new. Voiceover, they tried to brand me with shame, but the fire only burned my skin, not my soul. And sometimes the quietest voices say the strongest things. Narration over final frame. If Clara's story moved you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories of strength, survival, and the power of human connection. What would you do if someone saw beauty where others only saw scars?